true civilization never really disappears. It just steps back, leaving behind a system waiting to be rebooted. They are ancient structures that simply don't make sense using the technology assigned to their era. Massive stone blocks, each weighing hundreds of tons, positioned with microscopic precision. Temples aligned with the stars, off by no more than a fraction of an arc. And clay tablets, written 5,000 years ago, yet describing cosmic cycles we've only confirmed recently. All of it feels less like spiritual ritual and more like the remnants of a technological system. A system once operated by beings our ancestors called the gods. In the oldest Sumerian texts, they were known by one name, Anunnaki, those who came down from the heavens. But the strangest part isn't how they arrived. It's how they left. No final war, no epic tales of mass extinction. Just this: they were here, then they weren't. All at once. They left behind control centers, hollow temples, and abandoned cities, like a remote program suddenly cut off. In this video, we'll follow the trail of technical clues and ancient data, from Nibiru to Eridu, from Mars to Nazca, to trace the calculated withdrawal of the Anunnaki, not as myth, but as a planetary operation that once ran and might just be gearing up to restart. In the ancient texts of the Sumerians, there's a planet that shows up with unusual frequency, not in the eternal stars, but in the patterns of return. They called it Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. Unlike the planets that move in regular orbits around the sun, Nibiru was described as having a long elliptical path that stretched beyond the limits of our known solar system. Every 3,600 years, it would swing close to Earth, bringing major upheavals with it. To the Sumerians, this wasn't just some celestial event. It was a real-world sign, the coming and going of beings from the sky. The inhabitants of this planet were known as the Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens to Earth. But they didn't descend by magic or divine force. They were a civilization built on technology, structure, and resource extraction. According to ancient records, Nibiru once had a powerful atmosphere, strong enough to keep the planet stable and protect life from cosmic radiation. But over time, that iron layer began to break down. Maybe due to cosmic disturbances, maybe because of internal magnetic cycles. As their shield deteriorated, temperatures swung wildly. Radiation spiked, and life on Nibiru entered a full-blown crisis. To fix it, they engineered something remarkable: a way to rebuild the atmospheric shield using microscopic particles of gold. Gold, with its chemical stability, radiation-reflecting properties, and resistance to oxidation, was considered the perfect material to create a kind of energetic barrier for an artificial atmosphere. The problem? Nibiru didn't have enough gold. And that's why they left their world behind. They didn't flee in panic. They planned it. A mission that looked a lot like our modern space mining projects, except it happened hundreds of thousands of years ago. They surveyed the solar system, searching for planets, moons, and asteroids with mineral potential. And out of all of them, Earth stood out as the prime candidate, with its iron core, ancient stone veins, and high gold concentrations. Especially in sub-Saharan Africa, Earth became the target. The first landing wasn't for conquest. It was for reconnaissance. They didn't bring armies. They brought scanners, analysis stations, orbital maps, and engineering teams. The Anunnaki didn't arrive as gods. They came as engineers and miners. Nibiru was the origin, but Earth was the solution. In the works of Zecharia Sitchin and original Mesopotamian tablets unearthed from ancient sites, it's clear that the first Anunnaki mission to Earth was led by Enki, one of their high commanders. But he wasn't just a leader. He was a biologist, geologist, and applied technologist from the Nibiru civilization. The chosen landing spot wasn't random. The Persian Gulf, with its mild climate, access to fresh water, and rich mineral deposits, became their first anchor point. There, they didn't just pitch tents, they built Eridu, the first city on Earth. But Eridu wasn't just a city. It was a command station, a distribution hub, and a technical base. It functioned like an outpost to monitor the environment, measure magnetic fields, and survey Earth's resources. From Eridu, they expanded outward. Nippur, Uruk, Shurupak, each one a link in their operational chain, all aligned with star data, celestial markers, and often built atop geomagnetic hotspots, a sign of their deep understanding of planetary electromagnetism. Nibiru wasn't a myth. It was the central command node for the entire operation, the place that issued orders, collected data, and rotated personnel based on Earth's cycle. And because that cycle is so long, 30,600 years, when they left, they didn't leave a note. They exited on schedule, on orbit. So the real question isn't, did they exist? The real question is, are we standing on the edge of their return? When the first Anunnaki team entered Earth's atmosphere, they weren't acting on divine impulse or mystical intuition. They followed a technical plan, meticulously calculated from the coordination center on Nibiru. The landing site wasn't chosen at random. Through orbital scans and remote geological analysis, the region near what is now the Persian Gulf was identified as ideal. Rich in ancient sedimentary layers containing precious metals and close to the sea, a natural water source needed for metal refinement via electrolysis-based technologies. Here, they built Eridu, which later generations called a city. But it was never just that. It was a multifunctional technical base, serving the entire gold extraction operation on Earth. Eridu housed environmental data stations, orbital navigation systems, and geological sample storage. From Eridu, they deployed astronomical calibration arrays, tectonic monitoring equipment, and interplanetary transmission systems, using tiered structures similar to what we now call ziggurats. But the original purpose had nothing to do with religion. Enki, the chief engineer in charge of Earth's ecosystem, was responsible for designing adaptive models to help the Anunnaki function under Earth's climate. He also oversaw water purification systems, air regeneration units, and the stabilization of the local magnetic field around Eridu. Under Enki's leadership, specialized teams were deployed. A survey crew sent to South Africa to map gold veins, a logistics team to build supply infrastructure, a biological unit tasked with long-term environmental adaptation. Their living quarters followed a closed-loop operational model, Each station included habitats, control rooms, and pilot mining zones, all linked back to Eridu via low-bandwidth comm systems. Later known cities like Nippur or Shuruppak may have been secondary outposts or regional command nodes, with Nippur acting as the central command relay. Star tracking systems embedded in tall temple structures weren't for worship. They were aligned to Sirius, Orion's belt, and the orbital intersections of the Sun, Moon, and Nibiru. These were used to schedule launch windows, seismic monitoring cycles, and resource handoffs. The technology deployed at Eridu was encoded, not openly documented. Clay tablets didn't depict machines in detail. Instead, they used standardized symbolic imagery, a kind of technical shorthand understood only by trained operatives. Mentions of a god of water who controls the spirits of the earth may actually describe a bioprocessing system, a fusion of hydraulics and mineralogy designed to extract gold from soft soil. Early references to Enki reversing the rivers were likely reports of redirected waterways, channeling ancient rivers into mining zones, or perhaps describing atmospheric effects triggered by regulation devices. Notably, stories about underground chambers where the gods convened may correspond to subterranean tunnels or storage vaults for sensitive equipment. At that time, humans didn't yet exist as a linguistic species, and early Homo erectus sightings of figures in fiery armor could very well be the spark behind later myths of descending gods. Eridu, as the hub, became the symbolic launch point for an interplanetary technical network, with Earth as the extraction node and Nibiru as the central command station. But even then, cracks were forming. Harsh environmental conditions, internal tension among engineering teams. These early stressors would become the catalysts for much bigger shifts in the chapters that followed. Once the Anunnaki's gold extraction system on Earth went into full operation, pressure started to build within their own technical workforce. The Igigi crews, the labor-class Anunnaki tasked with direct mining operations in southern Africa, were quickly overwhelmed. Exhaustion set in, injury rates spiked. Harsh climate conditions made everything worse. Interplanetary transport was expensive, so reinforcements from Nibiru weren't an option. Meanwhile, the demand for gold, essential to maintaining Nibiru's atmospheric shield, kept rising. Then came the breaking point, a strike. As recorded in ancient texts like Atrahasis, the miners refused to keep working. They torched outposts. They marched on Eridu, demanding to be pulled off the mission. This wasn't just a labor dispute. It was a full-scale operational crisis. At an emergency council in Eridu, Enki, chief bioengineer and the Anunnaki most familiar with Earth's ecosystem, proposed a game-changing solution. Create a native species, one that could perform physical labor, adapt easily to the environment, and be behaviorally programmable through embedded genetic codes. Instead of burning through Anunnaki manpower, Earth would manufacture its own workforce. This wasn't some divine act of a creator god. It was a technical decision based on genetic analytics. Beneath the surface of Eridu, in what were known as biohouses, essentially biotech labs, Enki's team began collecting genetic samples from Homo erectus, a local primate species with a developed brain and impressive survival instincts. But Homo erectus lacked some key traits: comprehension, obedience, and especially the ability to operate mining tools. Enki's team began gene editing, merging Anunnaki DNA with native genetic material to create a hybrid species named Adamu, the first human. This wasn't divine creation. It was code editing, adding, deleting, and splicing sequences. Think CRISPR, but more advanced, capable of embedding behavioral presets into neural pathways. The result? Adamu wasn't just a being who could swing a pickaxe. He was designed to learn through observation, mimic social behavior, and, crucially, to worship. That last trait wasn't in the original specs. It was a psychological maintenance feature Enki embedded deliberately. Worship wasn't spiritual. It was behavioral programming, an emotional feedback loop that promoted obedience, social cohesion, and loyalty to their superiors. Each human was both a tool and a mirror of divine hierarchy. They feared, they believed, and they served the ones they saw as gods. Alongside Adamu, a female version was created from the same optimized gene sequence, designed for reproduction and social bonding. This ensured the species could replicate biologically, without lab-based intervention. Their emergence marked a turning point. For the first time, humans became a species capable of social reproduction, skill transmission, and the slow formation of primitive labor culture. The leak of Anunnaki DNA into Homo erectus may explain why modern humans possess advanced cognitive traits like structured language, abstract imagination, and spiritual expression. But a tool becomes a weapon only when it becomes self-aware. Though engineered as a technical fix, humans began to move beyond their design parameters. Cave paintings, improved tools, communal structures. These were signals that Adamu wasn't just labor. He was building his own cultural operating system. This raised a major concern for the Anunnaki Council. Should they continue upgrading human intelligence to improve labor efficiency, or cap development to prevent future threats? This question would define the ideological rift between Enki, who believed in guided evolution, and Enlil, who saw humans as tools needing strict control. But in the beginning, Adamu saved the system from collapse. Mining resumed. The Igigi crews were rotated out, and a new species began its journey, not as a miracle, but as the inevitable answer to an engineering problem. The emergence of humans, Adamu, did more than solve the labor crisis. It triggered the most stable phase of the Anunnaki presence on Earth, the Golden Age. This was the era when energy, resource, and cultural coordination systems across Anunnaki-built cities began functioning like an interplanetary network with a defined structure. Earth was no longer just a mining outpost or testing site. It officially became a strategic node in Nibiru's broader technological grid. And the architect behind this entire system was none other than Enki. Ancient cities like Eridu, Nippur, Shurupak, Uruk, and Ur weren't merely places of residence. They were nodes in a web of biological programming, celestial alignment, and divine authority. Eridu served as the biological hub, where the human gene line was monitored and adjusted. Nippur functioned as the macro control station, a kind of mainframe for interplanetary signals and astronomical navigation. Uruk, under Inanna, granddaughter of Enlil, acted as a trade port and cultural broadcasting center. distributing pre-coded societal templates. Each region featured a pyramid-like structure. Ziggurats, not just symbols of power, but high-altitude transmission stations. Their stepped designs, sizes, and coordinates aligned precisely with fixed stars, particularly Orion's belt, the Pleiades, and Sirius. Modern researchers have theorized these structures may have functioned as resonance antennas, transmitting and receiving data to low-orbit satellites or Mars-based relay stations. To the people of the time, though, these were simply places where heaven touched earth, the dwelling sites of the gods. The Anunnaki didn't rule through brute force. They used soft power, a theocratic framework. Each regional ruler was said to be chosen by the gods, but in reality, they carried Anunnaki blood, semi-divine hybrids. These were the results of controlled breeding programs between humans and a select group of high-ranking Anunnaki engineers, creating beings with superior cognitive abilities who were also genetically predisposed to compliance. Thus emerged the God Kings, political leaders who were also biological interfaces between the Anunnaki system and the human population. People had no idea they were serving a high-level technological infrastructure. All they saw were shimmering robed figures walking temple halls, able to read the heavens, or summon rain and halt the sun. To them, these were gods. In truth, those temples housed me tablets, encoded data modules from Nibiru, written in archaic language and filled with advanced knowledge, astronomy, timekeeping, medicine, law, agriculture, and socio-political control. A few e-tablets were partially decoded and drip-fed to humans via rituals. Limited access versions, like apps with most features locked. Within this system, worship was critical, not just for faith, but to generate collective resonant fields, stabilizing societal psychology. Rituals, sacrifices, and god myths weren't just religion. They were cultural encryption layers, designed to maintain order and protect access to core databases. Enki, though humanity's creator, remained in the background of these official rites. In contrast, Enlil and the northern power blocks dominated the royal priesthood and sacrificial hierarchy, locking down all direct access to the real ME archives. Still, not everything was smooth. Cracks began forming within the Anunnaki ranks. A clash of visions. Enki, the biological architect, believed humans could become strategic allies, even inheritors of parts of the system, if properly guided. Enlil, head of the control structure, viewed humanity as a dangerous variable, to be limited, watched, and tightly managed. But at this stage, the conflict was still under the surface. On the outside, the Golden Age appeared orderly. ME tablets were partially implemented. God Kings ruled under the divine mandate, and everything ran like clockwork. This system lasted for centuries, maybe millennia, strengthened by administrative models, legal codes, astronomy, and star maps used to coordinate planting seasons, construction timelines, and expansion campaigns. Every divine command was, in truth, based on me data, carefully interpreted by a quiet group of Anunnaki engineers still operating behind the curtain. They were the coders of a living network no one could see. This was the age when humanity served the system, without ever knowing they were living inside one. The stability of the Golden Age didn't last forever. From within the very system the gods had built, the seeds of fracture began to grow. And not from humanity, but from within Anunnaki blood itself. At the center of this brewing storm stood Marduk, firstborn son of Enki. Marduk wasn't just royal by blood. He had been trained as an interplanetary engineer, having served on observation missions at the Mars relay station, Adamu. But when he returned to Earth, he wasn't content with a symbolic role or a token technical title. Marduk wanted control, not just over technology, but over the power structure still held by Enlil. With a sharp strategic mind and deep understanding of the ME system, the core infrastructure that kept the Anunnaki world running, Marduk began developing a new center of power, independent of Nibiru. That project was called Babel. Babel wasn't just a towering structure. It was a multi-layered facility designed as an atmospheric launch hub, meant to replace the aging bases at Sippar and the Sinai Highlands. Its architecture was based on ancient Nibiruan tech. The base, a vault for energy and data storage. The midsection, a command and coordination center. The summit, a stellar signal receiver, capable of docking with a mothership if necessary. Marduk staffed Babel with loyal engineers and select groups of semi-divine hybrids. Humans with enhanced cognitive traits and learning capacity. He used ancient programming languages to construct a new operating system. With Babel, his goal wasn't just to rival Enlil's influence. It was to build a fully independent center of belief, technology, and astronomy, where signals no longer had to pass through Nibiru for approval. But the Anunnaki Council didn't stay blind for long. Enlil, as the supreme commander, saw Babel as a direct threat. A new launch station meant independent extraction, or worse, the ability to summon outside forces from Nibiru. With his long experience managing the system, Enlil understood. Control of language, ritual cycles, and information flow was key to maintaining order. If an unsanctioned signal center took root, it could fragment the data network, and chaos would follow. He wouldn't let that happen. The plan to neutralize Babel was activated swiftly, but instead of brute force, which could divide the Anunnaki ranks, Enlil struck at the system's foundation, language. In a bold, technically precise move, Enlil triggered a protocol that fragmented the programming language used in Babel's ME-based operating systems. The result was a data communication breakdown. People who once spoke the same command set could no longer understand each other. Core linguistic protocols were scrambled, sabotaging system synchronization. Legends remember this as the confusion of tongues. But behind the myth was a high-level network reset, a calculated severing of consensus. Babel didn't fall from fire or war. It collapsed under system dysfunction and disconnection. Without unified code, engineers couldn't coordinate. The tower's launch systems failed to align. Marduk was forced to withdraw, taking with him a small group of loyalists and fragments of unfinished data. Enlil ordered a full lockdown of the Babel site, declaring it a sacred quarantine zone. Later, it would become a symbol of pride, punished by divine will. But the seeds of rebellion weren't destroyed, only reshaped. Marduk didn't vanish. He quietly retranslated the MR using his own coding standard and began rebuilding his system elsewhere, in a place where mainline Anunnaki power was fading. The stability of the Golden Age didn't fade quietly. As divine power began shifting away from its original center, fractures within the Anunnaki Council were no longer just theoretical or ritual disputes. They erupted into a destructive war. Beneath the surface of ancient ceremonies lay a highly advanced operational network, with data hubs spread across Mesopotamia and beyond. When Marduk reignited his control model in Babylon, directly challenging Enlil, the balance between divine factions collapsed. And that's when the term weapons of terror first appeared in ancient texts. As a dire warning, these so-called weapons weren't swords or sacred fire, as myths would later suggest. Based on veiled descriptions from Sumerian tablets, they appear to have been high-energy devices, operating through electromagnetic pulses or ion-based particle waves, strong enough to disintegrate biological systems, level entire cities, and permanently damage the biosphere. The clay records name 7 weapons, each with a symbolic title: the flame that does not die, the poison wind, the burning light. But alongside these names are chilling descriptions of what followed their deployment. White ash blanketing cities, barren land where nothing grew, poisoned water, skin blistering on contact with the wind. This wasn't mythic language. It was post-blast physics, disturbingly close to the effects of radiation or tactical nuclear-level energy weapons. As tensions between Enlil's faction and Marduk's rising power hit a breaking point, the council was summoned to a neutral frontier zone. There, Enlil proposed what many considered unthinkable: the use of ultimate weapons to eliminate the threat to planetary order. At first, many gods objected. They knew the consequences could not be controlled. But Enlil invoked the core principle: order must be preserved at any cost. With quiet backing from the high-ranking elite, the order was passed. 2 high-energy devices would be deployed, targeting Marduk's base in Sinai and a central residential zone in Sumer that he was using as a signal relay. The strike came without warning. According to Atrahasis and local chronicles, the sky split open and a second sun appeared for a moment. Then came the wind, but it wasn't natural. It was a wave of dry, scorching air that swept through urban zones like an invisible storm. Cities like Sodom, Gomorrah, and the Sinai region were hit first. What had been vibrant signal command centers became zones of melted stone, scorched copper, briny water, and white dust. In the Sumerian plains, a secondary wave hit. Crops died. Water sources became chemically unstable. Animals panicked. The people had no idea what had happened. They only said, "The gods withdrew," and the evil wind came from the southwest. No official record lists the death toll, but the aftermath lasted generations. Survivors recall the earth groaning for 7 days, blood-red skies, and a moon that disappeared for weeks. While Enlil declared the act a final measure to protect peace, many divine officials and neutral observers began questioning the morality and limits of intervention. What had taken thousands of years to build, Eridu, Ur, Nippur, now lay in silence. And with that silence came a divine exodus, not out of defeat, but out of regret. The Forbidden War didn't just destroy cities, it destroyed faith in absolute control. From that point on, the phrase evil wind became a symbol of man-made catastrophe wrought by the gods themselves. But beneath that symbol was something deeper. This was the first time the Anunnaki system was sabotaged from within by its own technology. Technology meant to build had now broken the very foundation of the network that sustained their presence on Earth. After the Forbidden War and the detonation of high-energy devices in Sinai and the Sumerian plains, a deep shock rippled across the entire Anunnaki system on Earth. This wasn't just environmental fallout. It was a systemic collapse. Communication hubs like Eridu, Nibiru, and Uruk, once the core nodes coordinating Earth's connection with Nibiru's orbital grid, suddenly went silent. The temples still stood. The ziggurats still held their astronomical signal towers. But no signal was being sent. It wasn't an ending. It felt like a manual shutdown, like someone from above had pulled the plug. The divine leadership fractured in three directions. Enlil, after witnessing the unintended consequences of the energy strikes, withdrew his forces from the central command. With no one maintaining the theocratic protocols in Nippur, its guidance systems fell dormant. Inanna, once the high operator of communications and trade, also abandoned Uruk, leaving behind a city running on ritual autopilot. People continued their ceremonies, but no responses came from the divine interface. Enki, who had never participated in the war directly, quietly left Eridu, the city he once considered his biological control base. Some tablets say he buried the Emmy beneath the sea before departing, sealing off the knowledge to prevent further abuse. A vacuum formed quickly. Disconnected from Nibiru, cut off from the motherships, the divine control system degraded into ritual repetition. People still offered sacrifices, still built temples, still carved symbols into stone. But no one realized they were running a system long since powered down, like calling into a radio with dead batteries. Those who rose to power during this time, descendants with Anunnaki hybrid DNA, began seizing control as the new priestly class. They couldn't reconnect the system, but they knew how to preserve its illusion through symbolism, ceremony, and myth. This was the turning point. The gods began disappearing from history as living figures and reappearing as sacred archetypes in human religion. Within the remnants of the Anunnaki, only a few stayed behind. Primarily, Marduk's faction. After Babylon was spared during the Forbidden War, Marduk took it as a sign. He was chosen to become the center of a new divine order, no longer answering to Enlil or awaiting transmissions from Nibiru. Marduk rebuilt his power in Babylon, structuring it around geopolitical dominance via divine kingship. This was no longer about technology. It was about control through legend. Marduk abandoned the original Anunnaki energy systems and instead used mythology as infrastructure, maintaining his influence across generations through sacred narratives. Meanwhile, the remnants of Anunnaki tech were either abandoned or repurposed as relics. The ME tablets, data storage devices from Nibiru, no longer functioned, but were now worshipped as sacred objects. The ziggurats, once transmission towers, no longer pulsed with navigational data, but still hosted elaborate rituals. What's striking is that the collapse didn't come with destruction. It felt more like a deep sleep mode. No one erased the data. They just forgot how to turn it back on, and that led to a consequence far greater than war. Humanity began to drift away from its technological origin. The stories of the gods, originally records of biological engineers and celestial navigators, were retold as supernatural myths. Knowledge became legend, technology became magic, and the silence that followed for thousands of years, it wasn't absence. It was the echo of a system that had intentionally withdrawn. Like someone once built a global infrastructure and then vanished, leaving behind blueprints no one could read anymore. In the interplanetary infrastructure system established by the Anunnaki, Earth was never the final destination. It was just a key mining outpost, one node within a larger network of planetary transit hubs. Another crucial location was Mars, referred to in Sumerian inscriptions as Lamu, the red planet orbiting closer to Earth than Nibiru. Though today Mars is a barren desert with an atmosphere too thin to support sustained life, some of its geological anomalies, including massive straight lines stretching for kilometers and oddly geometric mounds, have led many researchers to believe it once served as a transit station. From a technological standpoint, Mars was ideal. A refueling depot, a materials waypoint, or a crew transfer hub for missions between distant orbiting Nibiru and Earth. Modern aerospace engineering would agree. Using a planetary stopover drastically reduces fuel demands and avoids gravitational stress points. Meanwhile, on Earth, far beyond ancient Mesopotamia, another site adds weight to the theory: Nazca. Located on the high plains of Peru, Nazca stands out for its massive lines, perfectly straight, stretching across miles, even over hills without deviation, and its enormous abstract figures only visible from above. These weren't made for walking rituals, as older theories claimed. Their length and linear precision suggest something far more complex. A more fitting hypothesis, especially when compared to the ziggurat-based astronomical stations built by the Anunnaki, is that Nazca was a landing zone for aerial vehicles. If the Miyu, flying craft mentioned in Sumerian texts, were real, they wouldn't have required modern runways, but they would need navigation markers and designated landing corridors, likely aligned with stellar coordinates. Moreover, the animal and geometric figures at Nazca weren't just art. They may have served as visual identifiers or communication symbols, transmitting messages from ground to sky. If you study the long straight Nazca lines, they're anything but random. They align precisely with the horizon, solar solstices, and key stars such as Sirius and Orion. This doesn't just point to a sophisticated understanding of astronomy. It suggests Nazca functioned as a celestial navigation center, a place where off-world pilots could calibrate their approach angles before descent. In Andean legend, we find mention of Viracocha, a tall, light-skinned figure wearing a rounded headdress who came from the sea and promised to return one day. He wasn't worshipped like local earth gods. He was the one who came and left, bearing knowledge and prophecy. This description overlaps eerily with Anunnaki archetypes, beings who withdrew after chaos, leaving technology and myth behind. If we compare Viracocha to figures like Enki or Marduk, it's plausible he was either a surviving emissary or the final extension of the Anunnaki presence on the other side of the planet. The appearance of Mars and Nazca in theories about the Anunnaki isn't coincidence. In an interplanetary resource and communication system, you always need a destination, Earth, a midpoint relay, Mars, and a surface-based positioning beacon, Nazca. These stations, strategically placed at astronomically significant locations, built with geometric precision and aligned with celestial mechanics, suggest a globally coordinated design. After the system was deactivated, these sites weren't destroyed. They were simply left behind, not as ruins, but as technical fossils, places where memory still exists in lines and stone, waiting for those wise enough to recognize. They were never myth to begin with. They didn't vanish like a civilization wiped out by disaster. They withdrew on a path that feels deliberately pre-calculated. The deeper I dive into the ancient infrastructure, from Eridu and Nippur to Nazca and Lahmu, Mars, the clearer the pattern becomes. A technological model, not random, suggesting that the so-called gods in Sumerian texts may have been an interstellar expeditionary group, operating not through myth, but through scheduled cycles. What haunts me isn't the question, were they real? What haunts me is this. If all these starting points, ziggurats, astronomical towers, Nazca flight paths, physically exist and align with technological logic, then have we misunderstood their entire purpose? What if their departure wasn't failure, not abandonment, but the end of phase 1? When I reread the records describing the Mu, the flying crafts used by Enki, Inanna, and Marduk, I no longer think of legend. I see aerospace descriptions. When the gods ascended in fire and thunder, I picture iron drives or gravity displacement tech, their retreat from Eridu, from cities poisoned by energy fallout, might have been a tactical withdrawal, a way to preserve the mission after internal sabotage, and maybe they never planned to stay. Nibiru, with its 3,600-year orbit, returns in cycles. A civilization advanced enough wouldn't need constant presence. Instead, they left. The ME tablets, not just laws, but data modules, bloodlines, genetic seeds with the capacity to learn, to evolve, to link with intuition. Structures, massive, precise, and still unmatched by our tools today. That deliberate exit forces a bigger question. Were we ever abandoned, or were we activated to take the next step on our own? When I reread the ancient line carved into a clay tablet, those who held kingship from heaven have returned to heaven, I no longer hear an ending. I see the beginning of a cycle, waiting to be re-engaged. Maybe we don't need them to return as gods. Maybe we need to reactivate what they left behind. Through the logic, knowledge, and curiosity they coded into us. And if that's the case, this video isn't a retelling of a myth. It's a schematic of a sleeping system waiting to be decoded.